Hello, welcome to Make More Noise. Please like the video down below, subscribe and share. I'm here with a very special guest, a grassroots organiser who's been working as a lesbian agitator for 40 years, Joey Brite.
Like that, working as a lesbian average. I always wanted to get paid for being a professional lesbian. Never made it. Never
Yeah,
made it.
no. Just thought I'd get started, put the cat among the pigeons, about an article that you wrote, and I think it's where you came onto my radar, and a lot of women in the GC movement, was an article you wrote called, I believe it was Horsemen of the Gender Critical Apocalypse.
Yes.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about why you wrote that and some of the reactions that you had after you'd written it?
Sure. Earlier in 2020, there was an article released by Jennifer Billick, and it was called Deconstructing the Good Trans Woman.
Mm-hmm.
And she started inviting the conversation about why are we looking at these people? And in that case, it was Debbie Hayton and I believe Christina Harrison. I think she broke down. And she
Okay, so these are trans people, who trans-identified males who speak on our side, on the gender critical side.
Yeah, AGPs that seem to get some sort of cachet within a handful of women or something in the UK, and we got to know about them here. And there's this idea that yes, they were allies, that they were allies. And I believe that's what she focused on in that. And then a week later, and this was in Uncommon Ground, Jennifer's article, then a week later, Julia Long came out with an article that went even deeper into Debbie Hayton a little bit. And it was called A Meaningful Transition. And that really got me, because in the time that those came out in May of 2020, both of them in Uncommon Ground, I had already been thinking about some of these 24/7 LARPers, Americans mostly, and I'd started writing some notes about that, but I was also working on my conference, which happened in August. So I had been working for almost a year at that point when these articles came out. So I kind of tucked it aside. In August last year, I did the Can I Get a Witness conference, which was online. It ran for 13 hours. It was a marathon. And it was a gender critical, idea. And then I was able to, when that was done in September, I went back, revisited the working on this article that I had, which was kind of interesting because in July, two more characters came up for me than two others that I was working on. So what I decided to do was focus on 4 individuals, and 3 of them were American. One was British. That one was Fionn Orlander and Blair White. Those were the 2 men. And then I focused on Americans, and Blair White's an American. And then I focused on 2 women who've been LARPing as men for a while, one for a very long time, Buck Angel, who's also a pornographer. People tend to forget that's something. They just kind of, I don't know what, they overlook it, like it doesn't matter. And Scott Nugent, and she's in Texas now. I think she's originally from California. And the hypocrisy, the article, I wrote it because one of the last things that really kicked it over for me was being on Facebook and seeing these women constantly post, "Oh, have you seen what Blair has done this week? I wish my husband would listen to her." And that did it. And that was that sealed me for what was going on. And once I had my 4 people, by the end of July, I wrote this article, and it really was to challenge the reader that thinks of themselves as being critical about this whole, plague that is smashing us in every aspect of society, and really look critically at, think beyond your friend that you've had for 20 years, and now he thinks he's a woman, or he whatever. I never had any friends like that. I had gay male friends that were very effeminate, that liked to use girl, and it was mostly at parties, closed doors, clubs, things like that, and very personal, cultural things. I was called boy. They would joke around. It was no big deal. Gender bending was a big thing, and it was fine. And now all of that has been essentially removed, from our culture. It's like, I mean, there's not, as I say, a lesbian culture anymore. But anyway, I wrote the article. It came out, and it was like an explosion. And I knew that it was going to ruffle some feathers, but I had no idea that it would have the impact that it did. As of just a few days ago, a younger woman reaching out to me, and she said that on Twitter, there are a whole group of these women who call themselves rude femmes. And I'm not in that world. I'm not in that particular thing. And she said they're talking about my article. It's like every few months I have this sort of revised reminding that there are new people waking up. They read that article. I'll get an email. I get a DM. Thank you so much. I get it. I'm not going to look back anymore. I'm not going to focus on. And yeah, again, what we do in our very personal lives, I don't care if you've got somebody in your life that you feel you need to validate in some way. You've got history. We all have contradictions and things that go on. I get that. But in public and at work and out in the public sphere, it is so imperative that we make sure, as Julia Long always says, I'm one of those people. Hold the line. Don't, if the more that we step back or the more that we show that, the more we're going to be targeted. And the further we keep taking things back to the Stone Ages, when we do things like that. That's how I feel. So, yeah, the article caused ruffles for sure.
Yeah. What do you think accounted for that? Because I see this sometimes when there are certain characters like yourself and Julia Long who do hold the line, sometimes can be a little bit rude, but I don't think it's the tone that's actually being criticized. It's the line, which I always struggle with, that the true trans line that some trans women are women or should somehow be in the social category of women, which I think appeals to people who are newly peaked or who have, I think a lot of it is people who have trans friends, but I think further down the line, you can see the problems with that, because the more you think about trans as a category, even things like the trans medical side, the people who even go all the way and have genital surgery, you still can't really put that together with the gender critical line that, biology trumps gender, basically. What do you think accounts for the criticism and the backlash that people like yourself receive from certain sectors of the community, as it were,
Well, it's shaking up your world. If you say that you have a trans friend, which I don't have any trans friends, when you start criticizing, what does that actually mean? And you say, and I would say, non-binary, any of these identities, these are identities and they're made up. And they have pretty much come about because of medicalization. You mean, you have to admit that the only way that you're saying that you're going to be, performing something or trying to change the exterior so much that you are trying to trick people, that you're the opposite sex. Well, then you have to admit that there are two sexes if you're going to be trying to, trick people. And as soon as you admit that there are two sexes, then you realize there's not some other sex. It's only the way that we present and what we choose to do. And I was mistaken for a man for years. I mean, just in my dress and whatever. I wore a lot of suits. I still do when I go to post COVID, at some point. But anyway, whenever there's openings, just because I put a suit on, like all of a sudden and this is what the new thing is now. There's a lot of stuff where the big pharma is pushing for more medicalization and more surgeries. And they're almost, now what I'm learning is that they're trying to skip puberty blockers and move directly to cross hormones at the age of 9 for kids. Yep. This just came up on my radar this past week. It's like, skip that, let's do this. There's some sort of a need for speeding up this medicalization process. But in the culture, this trend and this fad is taken over, like, oh, you don't even have to do anything. You just have to say it. You just have to say, for men, I feel like a woman. And for women, what I'm seeing, the trend is that there are a lot of young women, and they're not even lesbians. They're heterosexual young women that are being fed information via the internet to get confused and think that they can become a gay man. And then they're going to get to be with men in that way. And it's, there's just such a conflation of things going on here. But what do I think about this about that article and what you asked me?
Mhm.
It's that if I have somebody in my life that I'm close to, they identify that way, I have to
Mhm.
start thinking that's a mental problem. It's emotional, it's
Mhm.
mental.
Mhm.
And if I love that person, then I have
Mhm.
to think, well, he or she has got a problem, like a real mental problem.
Yeah.
That's not something that actually exists. And
Yeah. Like,
there's where the uh-oh, and now you can't say that about my friend, and whatever. There's that. And I do think there's a lot of class stuff around
mhm.
this. I think there are a lot of different issues at play. If you have been somebody, say, that's written books about this and you need to stick to this line and you've said that trans women are women or you use the she, it's kind of hard to back away from that because your work that's out there and published.
Yeah, you can't just delete your old Facebook posts and things. I mean, do you think, because I think a lot of this is, because I know I've spoken to people in public and in private who take the trans women and women, not, well, sometimes they give pronouns. And I think we're all on the same page, really. Like, we know that trans women are men, male. But I think that there is a line that's being taken to appeal to the mainstream because we're so far on the back foot. Like
Mhm.
a lot of publications, unless you do pronouns, they won't even think about publishing your piece. For
Right.
so many of a certain class, to say trans women are men is such a shocking thing. Do you think that it's a tactical decision that they're making, but they can't say that it's a tactical decision because it would undermine their legitimacy in the eyes of the people higher up? And do you think it's almost like they're frustrated that you're maybe showing them up to be a little bit not fake, it's not fake, fake's the right word, but a little bit duplicitous in the way that they are? I mean, I don't know, like, I think maybe there's a place for that. Maybe we are so far on the back foot that we needed to open up the language with words like male identified, male bodied, and maybe that has opened the door so that we now can start to use language more frankly. Do you think there's an argument that that maybe we should make some compromises on pronouns just so we can have the conversation, so we can shift things, so that then people like you and I, Joey, who call a cat, can be more forthright?
No, I'll tell you what, there's two different things that I hear in the question that you just said. And I would go back to when I brought up about if you've written a book and you've used all the pronouns and you've done all that, and that's what you're making money off of, that's what people know you as. There are a lot of those women, Jane Claire Jones, okay, Jane Claire Jones.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of women that do that, I think, for a variety of reasons. It could be, again, selling their work, their whole persona built about it. I think that they're not stupid. They know that the man is a man, but it's like they branded themselves and they've put themselves in a corner around that,
Mm-hmm.
and they're clinging to it like, I'm right, I'm right. And one of the reasons that they stay on that, I think, then we enter into, this has to do with elitism and class issues and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, because there are other women I know. And what you brought up, do you think we need to compromise? No, those
Yeah,
compromises already took place, I think, 2016, 17, 18. By 2018,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
that was like the bomb year, I considered, for both where you are and where I am.
Mm-hmm.
The money, I mean, it was 2014 was an enormous push of money into everything that came around the T.
Mm-hmm.
And in San Francisco, where I am, that had been started, already 2 decades before. But by
Wow.
2008, from 14 to 18, no, it was bad. And I'll give you an example. When I was planning my Can I Get a Witness conference,
Mm-hmm.
which started for me when I get kicked off Twitter in April of 2019, the idea came in my head of having a conference. It was a physical conference.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the Rona came around. What am I going to do? I'd already had some speakers and everything planned. Then as soon as it became that it was going to be online, then it was like, oh, this is going to be international. I
Mm-hmm.
invited a well-known, I'm not even going to say his name. I invited a well-known Brit who would have ended up being one of 27 speakers. I would have had this man who sometimes says that he's gay, sometimes says that he's trans, but he's been this ally of feminists in a particular way because he's a good writer. And I had invited him to be one of my speakers. And then, we spoke. We had a very pleasant conversation. The entire conversation I had with him about the conference, he liked the idea. It was all going to be about him being gay. We were speaking as two, lesbian to gay man.
Yeah.
Full 4 hours or something that we spoke. And then he just flaked out. And he ended up, there was no argument, there was no fight, there was no nothing. He flaked out, which is what happened with maybe 3 other people. So I lost him. And in doing that, it turned out to be really nice because when the conference happened, I didn't have anybody who would ever even define themselves that way. So I can say that I had pretty much a turf, it was a full turf conference. It wasn't anything where I'd have to backpedal about. But if I had had that and he had been included, I would have said, that's because my mentality that I even asked him. I had a couple people say to me, oh, why are you even asking him? I thought at the time that his voice was important. I thought at the time that he was an ally. I thought at the time, like what you're talking about, that it was a way to bridge women who felt like we needed these men, like straight men like Linehan. We don't need him, okay? I'm saying that right off the bat. There are straight men and gay men and these men that say that sometimes they switch between this fake identity or being gay, that say that they're allies. And at this point, I'm saying they are like a weight around our necks that are dragging us down. Again, if you have personal relationships with these people, fine. They're human. Everybody has relationships. We need to support each other in our personal lives. But this as a movement, when people talk about the movement, I mean, there are so many aspects to that. Nothing's monolith. And for me, the idea of even using pronouns and hey, I can, as a privilege right now, I don't know if I'll have this much longer, but I know that in Canada, Heather Mason, who has been doing amazing work in Canada with the men and the women's prisons issue, try to keep same-sex prisons, same-sex prisons. She has to use those pronouns. She has to. I understand that because she's in a country that literally can convict her of that as a crime. Right now, where I am, probably if we start this really going on, and it's kind of like starting on the back end in California, I might get in trouble if I say the things that I'm saying to you right now.
Yeah, well, this has always been my problem with pronouns, or my developing problem with pronouns is you might be happy to give them to your ally friend who's a very good ally, but then at the same time, what about the rapist who's in a women's prison? And the now I think in England, prisoners who refuse to use pronouns for male prisoners who are in their cells with them, they can get written up and they can get extra time added to their sentence. And I feel like it's the thin end of the wedge. And I also feel like if it seems a bit it just seems a bit unfair to give them pronouns to people you like, the good ones, and then not the bad ones. I'm kind of with trans white activists on this. Like, either you believe that pronouns are a thing or you don't. You can't misgender people just because they've done something wrong. Because a woman doesn't lose. If a woman does awful, violent acts, she doesn't stop becoming a woman. And I think that that's to me why I think we should be a bit stronger on pronouns. It's not so much for us, and when we're having conversations, I think it's for women on the bottom of this rung who are going to be stressed out and not going to remember to lie, for all those reasons. It's the working class women on council estates who haven't read any Judith Butler, don't know what a pronoun is, don't know what they're supposed to be saying. They've got a right to speak in this debate, and I feel like a lot of this is quite language policing in a way that feels like it's shutting down working class people's voices, because I think we're a bit more forthright and we'll just call a spade a spade. And I think sometimes it's making it difficult for other people to enter into the debate, whereas I think people who mind their P's and Q's a little bit more can sort of have a platform as a reasonable person while we become like gender extremists almost, or sex-based extremists. I don't know what you want to call it, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's always go ahead.
Yeah.
It's always the so-called more extreme or radical or whatever. I lived a lesbian separatist life for years. That was an extreme within lesbian culture. It was a bubble. And there were a lot of us, but we were spread all over the country. In California, I knew who every lesbian separatist was, back in the day. And so this idea of extremism and all that, knowing you bring up a good point, and I agree, again, coming back to class, if I don't have a book published, if I don't have something that has been sort of in this lexicon, in the culture that's been embedded somehow, then I can be dismissed very easily. But what happens with the compelled speech is what you're talking about, the pronouns and this and that. Who are the people that this most affects? The women. This affects lesbians. This affects women of color. This is working class. It's like with the protests I'm doing at the pediatric gender clinics across the country. When people come to the protesters and they take a pamphlet and they pat them on the back or whatever and say, "I'm really glad you're here," and this kind of a thing. These are the gardeners, the landscapers. They're the housekeepers at the hospitals. They're the people that are out in the parking lot minding the cars, the security guards and all that. And sometimes the nurses now, we're finding nurses coming out more and like this, and they're doing it away from the cameras, so they can never be seen that they did that. This is so elitist. It started out with, it's been a basically white, white targeted community, kids that are more middle class and things like that, especially in the United States. That has had a rapid downturn now to where it's spreading across classes and it's spreading across race.
We see that. We've seen that in the UK. It's the worrying thing now. It's in the working classes, and I've actually seen it being targeted on poor neighborhoods where they'll have rainbow clubs in some of the most deprived neighborhoods, teaching them kind of inappropriate things that sort of started, and now it's coming down, and that's going to be the worrying thing when all the dust settles, and it's embedded, and it's growing now globally in countries like it's in the UN now, and if it all stopped tomorrow, then it would still. The wheels are in motion, I suppose. I mean, what do you think about, have you seen the Dave Chappelle special, The Closer?
Yes, I have.
What do you think about his line of argument? Because he's basically saying that this is all about white men making themselves the most oppressed people and using it to shut up people like himself, a man of color who's trying to talk about his people's struggle for liberation. Now he's got to kowtow to some white middle class male. Do you think that he's on the right track with that sort of line of argument?
Oh, absolutely. The thing is, what's happened in America is that they've picked because they know that it's a white elitist movement. They know that it's a men's rights movement where mostly the white elite men all started this. But then what they started to do is get their token black men. And the token black men, got completely, when you look at, again, 2014 with Laverne Cox. Yeah. We had this very popular, Netflix show that attracted a huge female audience to look at this, this fictional family situation of women in prison, in an American prison, right? Black. And I mean, immediately from jump, this, this actor who was playing a woman full time and in his real life, Laverne Cox became the pornified ultimate, black version of what we had with the very elite white male with Bruce Jenner becoming Caitlyn Jenner, right? So that was really how this thing started. Was more like if you had visuals of Caitlyn, now Bruce Jenner becoming Caitlyn, and that whole thing that was orchestrated and handled in such a way that it was. And then Laverne Cox starts to get, because again, we love celebrities, and working class people tend to, because our voices are so smashed down. So anybody that has a higher education, a higher formal education, has written books, or even just shows up on TV. Once you're on TV, you're all of a sudden, it's like you've got the pass now. You are better than, you are smarter than, people need to listen to you more, whether you're a man or a woman, the moment you've hit the TV. That's why certain feminists, if that happens, everybody's like, oh, she spoke. And it's like, okay, you know, but we immediately dismiss, again, bringing up working class autodidacts like myself, bring up Jennifer Billick. I know this is, she's an autodidact like I am. I don't know. I don't know where it goes from there. Now I've kind of lost my train of thought with you, and this I'm enjoying that we're even having this conversation. It's great.
Yeah. What do you think about? Sorry, I was using Dave Chappelle as a smooth inlet. Yes. You went to the I saw a cheeky little photograph. Took itself around the world of yourself grabbing a sign from a gigantic autogynephile. You were at the Dave Chappelle protest, weren't you, in Los Angeles? Is that right?
I was, and at the time of this recording, it was less than 2 weeks ago. And connected up with the way that this thing got started, because of all the protests that I've been doing around the country. I've got a team of people, with Can I Get a Witness? But there was this team of people that started because it was a parent-led protest in front of one of the most brutal of the doctors, who brags about having top surgery on at least 2 trans a day. That's what Joanna Olson Kennedy says. In Los Angeles Children's Hospital, there was a mom and a dad that started protesting there in December of 2020. That kicked off this series of protests that had been happening. Well, that mom, she's the one that came up with this idea and said, look what's happening in LA tomorrow, because she lives in LA. And she put this out in our Signal group. And immediately I saw that. And being from Los Angeles myself, I know how the publicity machine kind of works. And I know what press conferences look like and things like that. And I thought, this is an incredible opportunity, not to be missed, to be able to show up. There's going to be international press. If just a few of us can show up, make our presence, make our turf presence there, our team turf presence there, as Dave used that phrase, that got him in all that trouble for the show. I knew that this whole thing was for show. I knew it was all going to be performative. I knew it was going to be a circus, and a perfect opportunity to switch into this mode, because we all have different ways there's different ways of protesting. And this was going to be a fantastic opportunity to get our different points across. So the whole day, I just literally had 24 hours, called a friend of mine who's even further away than I am. We went down to LA. There were 3 women who live in LA already that were there. We made 5. We had all these texts going on, all during the day before. How are we going to frame this? The mother had asked me, should I bring some posters, from the clinic protests? And I said, no, this is a whole other thing. This is about free speech. Censorship and free speech brings a lot more people together, and you're able to have this dialogue. She loved it. She made up some new signs. When we showed up, it was like one thing that we did. We were bonded before, we said, no matter what happens, we got each other's backs. We all have similar and different ways that we wanted to approach stuff. One woman wanted to talk more about the LGB angle of that. I wanted to get into the fact that this whole thing was a corporate takeover, and it led to the medicalization of kids, and it's all about money, And anyway, we all agreed we were going to work this thing, and we did. And there was nothing other than that was planned. So yes, there was a newspaper called the Epoch Times that wanted to follow this with us. They showed up. There were photographers all over the place. I mean, I gave radio interviews no less than 9 different countries myself. We were talking with each other later about this. Almost every, not every single one, almost every reporter I spoke with, when we would get through, they'd turn off their equipment, whether it was radio or they had video and news stuff or something going on, or they were a blogger. They would say to me, I'm so glad you're here, because there were literally only 5 of us that were there as TERFs. And then the two comedians showed up. But
the two male comedians, is that right? That's the viral video, isn't it? The fella, he had a sign saying "I like jokes," and then they stole it.
Vito and a guy named Rick, his buddy named Rick, and they both have YouTube channels. And oh yeah, he knew how to market that and really work it.
Yeah.
Anyway, we agreed we were going to hustle as much as we could, and a lot of that stuff, as soon as they showed up, and we were glad they were there. I mean, it was funny when they showed up, but the moment they showed up, literally, it was like cameras were all around us. Several of us had already done individual interviews and in duos with each other, interviews. And the minute they showed up, and we were doing this to each other, all the attention went to them. They were louder. They had signs that were up high, and they were doing, this with the signs, which I never allow at the protests that I do with Can I Get a Witness? We don't have anything where somebody can say and break a sign and then do what they did with him. Oh, he's got a weapon. They started that right away. I mean, there's a million things about planning a peaceful protest, and where you got to try to plan it to be safe. These guys weren't professional protesters. I asked Vito, who are you guys? What are you doing here? And can I interview you? And he said, we're just a couple of comics. We wanted to come and do this. And you know what? Like with Dave Chappelle, what they did, they pushed the conversation even further. But what happened was the TERFs and all the stuff that we did kind of got put in the background a little bit. There was a publication called the Epoch Times. They knew we were going to be there. They sent a photographer. They had already interviewed me about clinic protests and stuff like that. And he caught that photo. He caught that photo of me, which people wouldn't know what a comedic circus that whole thing had turned into. And even the tranny, and how he had, he was making fun of me while I was reaching up and trying to grab the sign. And that last attempt that I had, that was like the 3rd time, that's where I made contact with him. And he just looked at, he just turned and looked at me, and he went, help, help. A trans woman is being assaulted. And then he winks, and he was literally like, a foot from my face. And I let go, and I said, you're too good. I got it. This is crazy. And I said, you got some balls under that flimsy dress. And I just stood there for a second, and he looked at me like, and I thought, go ahead. There were photographers everywhere. There were people, TRAs were right on the other side of where his body was. And he thought about it for a second. Like physically hitting me, and I was ready to take it. And he took the sign and he folded it, and he winked at me, and he went off he jumped on his side where they were all kind of waiting. And he went, look what I got, and he was bragging about it. And that's something that, of course, you don't see in the photo, but what you see in the photo. And I got this tiny little bit of criticism from some of what, again, going back to Julian Vigo, calling the grand poobahs of the women's movement. This little thing started where everybody was laughing like, are you serious? That literally sending DMs to women saying this could literally destroy the gender critical movement, to this image. And it's like, women were going, oh my God, this is ridiculous.
Well, I think the image was fantastic, because it really showed the reality of the situation. And it was good that you kind of both had gender switch almost, a bloke who's pretending to be a woman, and not that you're pretending to be a man, but they're sort of thinking, because I am pretending to be a woman, I am a woman. I thought it was fantastic. An image speaks 1,000 words, and I think sometimes all the interviews you gave might have been a little bit in comparison to that one little picture. But do you know what? I just wanted to bring back something you were saying, because I think it's quite interesting, actually. I just want to ask you what your thoughts are. So you talked earlier about how you think that kind of men should stay away from this debate, or that they're kind of a hindrance to the debate.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what you felt about the viral video, the comedian who had the sign, and whether or not that was a hindrance. If he wouldn't have been there, do you think that the focus would have been on you guys, or do you think that that's the way they wanted to spin it anyway? And his involvement, it just brought to life the craziness, I think, of the crowd. That the woman with the tambourine going, repent, motherfucker.
She almost hit me in the eye. That's how crazy that woman was. She almost hit me in the eye with the one drumstick that she had. No, that's a different kind of man. That is an accidental ally that really did not come there trying to be like us. As a matter of fact, when I asked to interview Vito, and I said, like, who are you guys? There was this moment there. And he said, they're just comedians. I said, can I interview you? And then he looked at me really quickly, and he looked at my friend that was holding the team turf and all that. And he said, but I don't want to do anything against trans people. I'm not opposed to trans people.
Okay.
And I said, don't worry about it. I just wanted to talk with him. So no, that's different than a Graham Linehan or, any of these other guys that are purporting to be gender critical, and they are purporting to be allies, and they insert themselves even at, I think, the LGBT Alliance, when they're not gay or lesbian. There's these there's that they serve a purpose, and they should be doing that work. Any men who feel like they get what's going on, the only man that I know that's really doing that in a huge way and knows what his place is around this is Mr. Menno. That is, to me, that is a male ally, because he's trying to pique other gay men, and he's trying to pique men in general, and he's extremely supportive of women and centers women in that way. This is not what these other guys are doing. They're making, they're using the time. They want the views. They want to show up at places and have everybody go, oh, women already have a tendency to fawn over men and to want to get men's attention. They know that. They use it. It's a grooming technique. When Vito showed up and Rick showed up, they were all about themselves, being comedians, wanting to make a splash. And I think that Vito has gotten a huge level of, he was interviewed by Julian Vigo recently. Actually, she was just tossing all this feminism at him. That's not the angle that they came there for. If they had not shown up, yes, there would have been more focus on us. But we got so much material in, we got so many deep conversations in, and we were having individual interactions and whatnot. Again, this is Hollywood. This is America. What is it like? Flash, boom, comedians, craziness, and something like that in a circus-like setting.
Yeah, it's theatrical, isn't it?
It was theatrical, and it was very much the impact of what the cameras love and what news wants and things like that. And then the fact that he was a big guy. There's a whole physicality about that. He had a huge voice. So no, I don't see men like that. If Vito was constantly trying to talk about and act like he understands, which is what I feel like a lot of these men do while they're talking over women, while they are doing things in social media that go against some of the most amazing women. Kate Scotto, for instance, that's one of my, heroines at this point from a while ago. Any of these men that have a regular face in this and they act like they're so whatever, no, go away, do the work, keep doing the work, and do it in your communities, do it in your world. This is.
Yeah, I think men need to speak to men. It's my concern. I think I understand where they're coming from, but my concern would be that we do know that men have more of a platform and men listen to men, and also male violence, male sexuality. I'm not a man. I don't have testosterone flowing through my body. I don't really understand men, which is something that I've learned in this entire debate, is how different men and women are, and that men need to speak to men about men, because I don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like, but they can know what it's like and know how to get through to them. And men listen to other men a lot better than they listen to women. So yeah, it would be nice if that could happen a little bit more often. What do you think about the difficulties there is with the media trying to frame it in a certain way? Like they don't want the narrative, it seems, that this is a lot of the pushback is coming from Democrats, left-wing women, lesbians, people who are sort of lifelong activists. They want it to be about the left versus the right, another culture war. How do you think we can break down that sort of narrative that's being pushed? I know it's something that we struggle with, is just getting publicity when you do an event. what do you have any techniques or tactics, things that we should be doing? Do you think more kind of finding an event that's got press and then going there and doing some theatre, or is there another strategy? How best do you think we can fight ourselves to get our message out there on those platforms?
To try to get ahead of it. The thing is, it's like I've been working in PR for a long time, so I try to look at, for instance, I'm going to be doing a protest in about 3 weeks in another state.
Mm-hmm.
And it's around issues around girls having their breasts cut off and that they want Medicare to pay for it.
Okay.
So there's going to be this hearing that happens. Now that's different than a clinic. It's different than a guerrilla theater thing of Hollywood. That is letting press know ahead of time, which I always do with the protests. It is getting ahead of what is it that they are possibly, what can happen in this situation. And it's something that you and I off camera were talking about earlier, is that publicity has to be your number one thought, because you don't just show up to protest and have those few people that happen to be there, the bystanders, your friends, whatever that you brought, holding your signs, doing whatever, wearing dinosaur suits. I mean, you wouldn't do that without knowing this is the person that's going to film it. Here's a backup person that's going to film it. This person's going to take still images. Here's the person that's going to speak to the press. Oh, I've contacted this press. I know that that person is showing up. You plan all that ahead of time as much as possible, so that is what kind of protest is it going to be? What kind of action, really? When I hate using the word protest in that way, because these are all actions and they're all different kinds of displays of resistance, that we really want to put out there. You chose dinosaur suits. That was funny. That was catchy. That was comedic. That's where people notice things more, and then things can go viral. This left-right bullshit, this is so, here in the United States, and I think it's the same for you, I believe that the Tory party has always been sort of equivalent in like our Republican Party, that those are the more conservative people.
Yeah.
They've been couched in a way they don't care about social issues. They don't care about people
gay rights, women's rights, black
and they don't care about brown people or black people or yellow skinned people, any of these things that we have in terms of race and words and all this stuff. Race has been used so much against in the Western world, right? We've got this stuff. I think that really, again, it comes back to class and this thing about left and right. The Democrats, and I grew up in a family of Democrats, and that I think is more equivalent to your Labor Party in a way. That's the most equivalent that we have. Your Labor Party, our Democratic Party, they're the ones that took this money. They're the ones that took all this money because they went after people like my LGB people who like to think of themselves that we care more about people and that we don't want to be hurting people. All the people of different skin color, different religions, different class backgrounds. Democrats and progressives want to think of themselves as covering all the grounds, and it's hypocritical. It's absolutely hypocritical and it's ridiculous. But what's happened now in 2021, what we're facing, what I think you're facing as well, is there is no left and right. These parties are pretty much, they're going for money. Here in this country with Trump, the way that people were hailing, oh, yay, there were some gender critical women that were saying, well, it's great. He doesn't want to have people go into the military and pay for their sex changes. He doesn't want that. Oh, that was great for Trump. Trump would have gone down that way eventually.
Well, I think everybody lets the Tories off the hook, but they're the ones who've been in power for the past 8 years, who were going to bring in the Gender Recognition Act in the first place, who still flim-flap around it. I think that you're right. I think there's a lot of fake culture wars which are designed to keep us all fighting against each other.
Yeah.
Keep all the working classes fighting against black versus white, immigrant versus native, like all of these things are all designed to sort of to distract us from looking up at like what's really going on, and the fact that they're all kind of in it together. It feels like that, and it's so difficult to get to get this message pushed out there when most people, I think they have their identity and they're secure in their identity, whether or not that be left or right. And I think it can be quite difficult until a topic comes up that puts you outside of your tribe. Then it can be quite difficult to break down these barriers and make people appreciate some of the tricks that are being played by the politicians. I'm aware that you need to go, and they've got so much we could talk about. And I was wanting briefly to talk about San Francisco. Now, I heard you speak to an interviewer about some drug pushers who started to push tea back in the 1990s. But I think you've already covered that so well in another interview. So I'll link people to that interview if they want to learn more about that. But I'd really be interested to talk a little bit about your life in feminism for the past 40 years and the sort of disintegration of the lesbian community more recently. If you want to chat about that, I don't really know where to start, but I think that'd be real. I'd really like to learn a little bit more about that.
Just a quickie. I grew up very working class. Both of my parents were teachers. Again, in California, I'm a native we call ourselves Angelinos, from the Los Angeles area. So growing up during the late 50s and 60s and really being connected to the larger popular culture, because it was all around everything, advertising, all that stuff, movies. I always wanted to work in film. And I had said this, I think, in another interview, where the idea of visuals and what captured me as a little girl, paying 50 cents and seeing 3 movies in a row on a Saturday, that's pretty much what I did every Saturday. And being able to see how culture is influenced, how lesbians, and when I became a lesbian, I came out when I was 16 years old. I was still in high school. So, and I heard about this feminist thing was happening. There was this thing with this word, and it was Ms. Magazine, 1971. And I saw this thing that seemed like, nah, that's not for me. I don't care about that, even though I had been like a little lesbian for years. It's just that all of the stuff that I got from that time period of growing up, I adapted and adopted a lot of those methods to how do I get to spread the culture and support the culture, if not through the arts, the arts and creating a new kind of popular culture in a way. So I started producing concerts at a very, young age. I would say it was 20 years old or whatever. Started looking at seeing that there was a women's music scene that was just starting to happen.
This at the beginning of the sort of feminist separatisty type of situation where feminism was, I think a lot of women started coming into feminism. What year would this have been?
This is so I came out in 71, and by 74 there were murmurings of something that was going on. And remember, back in those times, DJ, what we had was writing letters and having arguments with women across the country or across the state or whatever. It was very expensive to talk to somebody on the phone. Everything was hardline, right? And so we'd have to wait, and you learned how to have patience when you were waiting for a response to an argument.
You can think about what you want to say rather than just shooting off at the mouth on Twitter, can't you?
Oh, yeah. And boom, block. You said something I don't like, I'm going to block you or whatever. That is something that from my generation, so I'm talking around 74, by that point, I'd already learned that there were, obviously, I'd been in a couple of relationships. I learned about other lesbians across the country. I had learned about the Lavender Menace confronting these grand poobahs of the women's movement at the time, which were Gloria Steinem, Bella Abzug, Betty Friedan, right? Those, and Lavender Menace showing up, and these lesbians with the lavender shirts with the thing saying, hey, you don't own a movement. We're part of that movement. And we're going to show you how we're part of that movement. And in that second wave saying that, this is, post Stonewall, with lesbians really creating communities. We were having bars, coffee houses. And I mean, a lot of these women that were not separatists, but they wanted to keep them women only spaces.
Yeah. Was it lesbian only, or was it still quite fluid at that time, just to make something for women?
Very fluid,
Yeah.
but mostly lesbians. And the straight women that were coming along, that were usually because they were friends with a lesbian, they were coming along that way, or they'd had some bad relationship happen or something, and they got introduced to the community because of concerts, because of plays, because of books that had come out, and now there was book tours and things like that to be able to organize. I just kind of naturally gravitated towards that. I was barely out for 4 years, and I was already producing events, and there was a women's coffee house where I was, and so we started really building a culture. I mean, there was a women's uh, financial institution. It was a credit union. The bookstores were a huge part of our culture that held, poetry readings. I mean, all this stuff, comedy, theater, everything blossomed. It just became this huge thing. And for me, being in California and where I was, it was up and down the coast. But the real place to be was San Francisco.
Okay, yeah.
And I was touring as a musician with another woman, two women at one point. There were three of us, and then there were two of us. Ended up performing at Michigan Women's Music Festival just the third year in 1978, when they had been in their third year. And that was very far across the country. Again, everything, when people think now how we can connect this easily, when would I have the money and the time and the everything to go and visit you and meet you there, or for, vice versa. This idea of developing relationships where you had to really trust women, and you had to do it was because over time and showing up to places, and was it going to be what they said, on the phone call or in a letter, when you came, so that when we came to perform in San Francisco, were there really going to be enough women at this place that we'd heard about called the New Moon Coffee House? And there were. And anyway, so yeah, I ended up being from a producer of events and learning how to do that. That's where I started getting interested in how publicity works and what do you need. And then, of course, with taking that, zipping ahead about 30 years or whatever, with the advent of camcorders, the phones, any of that, how all that stuff could be used so that lesbians could connect with each other, and then women could connect with each other as a general. But because lesbians have always been much more squished down no matter what we do, and the class divide right there, most every lesbian that I knew, it was years before I met a woman who called herself a lesbian that actually had access to, I mean, money. I mean, like real money.
Do you think that's because of the proximity to heterosexuality, to money, and that male partners and things like that, or closeted lesbians? I mean, why do you think it is that lesbians never seem to have any money? Or
all of that, plus the jobs. I mean, what kinds of jobs were going to be? In my case, I was either going to have to become a cop. I was interested in law enforcement. Was that natural? That was one of the jobs that was offered, that somebody said, well, you'd make a good cop. You'd make a good librarian. You'd make a good tradesperson. You'd make a good whatever, as long as it was something that was not going to threaten a whole lot of other people. I mean, the librarian thing, I that just came out of my mouth, but it was like way later somebody had said that. And then it became this joke, like, well, no, Joey couldn't become a librarian because that's too close to being a teacher. And she can't become a teacher because she'll be accused of child molesting, which is what other butch lesbians, that friends that I knew, three women, they were all lesbians who got fired from teaching. One had to be she was forced to quit. It was out of this humiliation, and it was all around this idea that they were molesting children, all three of them. And I thought, I can't be a teacher. So it's job limitations. It's really either the trades, taking a security job of some sort, which again, whether it's policing or being a security guard somewhere, there were not a lot of job opportunities. If you were going to be a secretary, I mean, you had to look cute, you had to wear a short dress and all this stuff. I never learned how to formally type because I was afraid I was going to get locked into a female profession, So yeah, there's that with class, and it's the things that you said, the proximity of heterosexual women. The first lesbians that I met that actually had money, they had been married. and they had built businesses with their husbands, or they got money through a divorce, and then they were able to have something of a nice little chunk to be able to grow from that. They'd been married, some had kids, but yeah, lesbians in general that I knew, they were single, they were poor or working class, they hadn't had opportunities, they didn't get left any money. Some had been, survived attempted suicides, had been beaten in relationships before. They were left destitute. They didn't have any ongoing alimony or anything. So, yeah, there's a big combination. And unfortunately, it's carried over into this gender critical movement. I've seen it, and I know this with certain women that, like I said, most of the grand poobahs are straight women. And even with the women who are lesbians, then gotten formal education, they've gotten the PhDs, again, they've written the books or whatever. There's something that's a cachet around seeming like you're going to act nicer, you're going to be more malleable, you're going to accept the pronouns, there's something around playing that game that is, there's often that class divide with that as well. So yeah.
I was going to say, do you think things have gotten better over time? Like you're saying, like I think a lot of thanks to the work of so many lesbian and gay elders, before now, you don't really have to worry about being accused of being a child molester if you're a teacher, or if you want to get into certain professions, people can come out now. Have you seen did you see improvements in the way things were going? I mean, it seems like we kind of got somewhere and then everything kind of fell apart. I mean, what state is the lesbian community in at the moment? Do you know what I mean? Like, do you think it exists anymore? I mean,
no. And I disagree with you with something you said, and I don't know if it's maybe that it's feeling that way for you, but when you said it's easier to come out now, I would say it's exactly the opposite, because coming out, and maybe you.
Well, now if you come out, you're like coming out as a TERF almost, isn't it? I think it's easier for people to be a lesbian as long as you can go through the mantras and trans women and women. But if you come out,
you're literally saying, I believe in same-sex attraction, right? Is that what leads you to say, like, well, that if you come out now, you're a TERF? If you come out,
I think you can come out, but you have to sort of, it's like the love that dare not speak its name. You have to be like, I'm a lesbian, but it's okay to be a man. If he wants to be a lesbian, he can be a lesbian. It's like if you are willing to sort of lie effectively and say that, a lot of young girls, I think, have been so groomed that that's the way they see it, because they're LGBTQ societies rather, have been telling them for years that unless you believe that trans women are women, you're a horrible bigot, and you can't stay in the community. I don't know if that was a line that existed back then. If it's like, it's almost like, it seems like it's a little bit of a loyalty test to sort of say you can come out, but only so far. Like you sort of.
I got to tell you, working with Alix, the gender mapper, and the fact that she's looked into the tech the way that she has, and she's turned me on to so many videos and things, like seeing what kids on YouTube Kids, there's this app that YouTube has called YouTube Kids. I would disagree that coming out is even an option. And when we're talking about lesbian and gay, because again, lesbian and gay are not even options. They're words that get tossed about, just like LGB gets tossed about. Everything is about not claiming to be any particular sexuality. There's pansexual gets thrown out. Non-binary is kind of replacing this trans idea, actually. We're moving towards nullification, literally, when you're looking at the surgeries that are going on. We're talking about that. So this idea of coming out, no, if a little girl or a little boy is online and they have friends online and they're playing Dungeons and Dragons or whatever they're doing, they tend to not say, I think I like girls, if it's a little girl. If she even says that, they go, oh, you must be non-binary then.
Yeah, you must be a man. Or
So no, we don't have a lesbian community anymore. It's gone. It's effectively destroyed. There are no more coffee houses. There are no more places to be able to get together and literally say that without also including men. So yeah, the community's gone, because as soon as you include men that say that they're lesbians, and you've got other lesbians that have accepted that and they're standing there with you, and then all of a sudden they start to turn their heads towards you, and now they are a gang, and now they're ganging up against you, and you're a hateful bigot. And then what happens? In 2018, friends of mine literally got shoved down by women in the Dyke March because of carrying a sign that said change society, not your body. Okay, so no, there hasn't been. It's not easier. I mean, I even started joking around. There was this campaign put out by this organization called the Trevor Project. They started this slogan, "It gets better." I don't know if that was anything you'd ever heard about yet. It gets better. And some friends and I were joking around as we were watching our community completely disappear, and say, no, it actually doesn't get better. And we used to joke around with each other, came up with comedy routines actually, like how it didn't get better and how it was getting worse. So what I have to answer to you, it may not sound hopeful, but because I've been watching this for so long over the decades, the only time that I would say that it got better was for about a decade. It was really, really nice for about a decade. And it didn't mean that lesbians didn't fight amongst ourselves, or that we weren't critical of certain things that we were doing or ways that we were doing things. Of course, that's always gone on. But it was a community. Like if I didn't like you, but I showed up somewhere in public, we'd just have to look at each other. We knew it was an unspoken, I got your back. Unspoken. For years that went on. Again, women that were battling it out in different ways about philosophical things, but we were lesbians. That's all that mattered. And we would have each other's backs. But there were these little skirmishes that came up around these men infiltrating our communities. For me, the earliest way that that happened was this women's record company called Olivia, who made a promise when they came out that they were going to teach women everything they could about the recording industry and the recording engineering and everything. Women would learn how to be salespeople in the record industry and all that. They did all that. They put out 2 albums. It was like that was part of the wondrous time. By the 3rd record that they put out, they had a man who said he was a lesbian, who was the recording engineer for Jimi Hendrix. His name was Sandy Stone. All of a sudden, this is a woman that we're supposed to accept, and a lesbian that was working for Olivia Records. There were only about 5 of us that said, you can't do this. You've broken your word on this. We were thinking about holding a boycott in front of where the studios were and stuff, but really there were too few of us, and we didn't have social media. We had nothing really we would have been able to do. If somebody had pulled out a Super 8 or a 16 millimeter, then it would have taken time and all that stuff. We started losing our voice when men started entering that I knew of in the music industry that we were building. There was a women's music industry for a period of time. Lady Slipper Music is another one, Olivia Records, but it got squished very quickly. Very quickly. So from there to Michigan Women's Music Festival.
What year would you say were the golden ages before it started to go wrong?
Oh boy. I would say from 73 until about 86, maybe something.
Okay. So that early, I was thinking, I don't know what I was thinking, but I mean, it was only 3 at the time. I mean, this is one thing that gets me, though, and this is one thing that I think gets missed out of discussion, so it's really uncomfortable to talk about. But it's all the other, it's lesbians throwing lesbians under the bus and going along with things. What do you think accounts for this? Because I can understand it. I can understand it, straight women and bisexual women. I don't actually get bisexual women because I'm bisexual and I know the difference between male bodies and female bodies is very, very obvious to me. I don't know why they're playing along with it, but there is almost like women who have lives with men. Maybe there's a loyalty thing there, But lesbians who have sort of made a vow to live without men and not be, you know, not have any part of it, I don't understand why. What I don't understand women who sell other women out. You know, in the UK, you've got Linda. Is it Linda Blair making a bit of book out there? Ruth Hunt, I think it was at Stonewall. Why do you think so many lesbians are sort of going along with all of this stuff and accepting men into the sort of women's world? You know, what do you think it is?
Well, we get into philosophical stuff, but then, you know, that's a big conversation. And why do we experience it right now in this so-called gender critical world that you and I are just traversing in? Who are the women that are throwing each other under the bus? Why are they doing it? Why do they have this reason? It's something that when we started this conversation, you know, there's some women, they have a trans friend. They know a man that's really effeminate and he sometimes says that he's gay or whatever, and they're nice and they've got relationships, personal relationships. The other thing is women who've had male children, of course, there's that, and the boys grow up to be men, and then how do they educate them and how do they fit them into their world if they're a lesbian, and what does it mean and all that. But I do think, I'm not an authority on this, but I do think that what I'm seeing right now with women, as I brought up earlier, who use the pronouns and this and that there's some personal investment in not wanting to appear, just like with my article that we started out talking about, the people that got really mad because I did get called, it was mean. It was so, I was so mean, you know, that was the thing, is that, oh my God, that's like the worst thing that you can say is no. I think it basically gets to that. When a woman says no, no is no. The women that need that to be mean is because they're protecting something themselves and they just cannot handle being unliked, being talked about in any negative way, being seen in a particular way that is, you know, again, just not friendly. Women in general, our socialization, whether we're lesbian or straight, our socialization is we take care of other people, we take care of children, we protect other people, we wrap our arms around those that are hurting, those that have less privilege than we do, those that are hurting, everything about it. What, again, going back to professions, what did women have in my generation more than they have in yours now? Nursing, teaching, you know, becoming something of a caregiver. There's all that gets wrapped up in being female. So why would that be any different when a woman becomes a lesbian? You know, they've just centered women a little bit more, but they haven't centered women and girls and raised boys, many of them, to be that way also, to respect women. So lesbians are no different. And then I have to say that, again, going back to what I consider this to be a decades long campaign with big money behind it. By 2014, DJ, we had our lesbian, this happened all around California. Every LGB center became LGBT, and every bit of money, and when you look back at money and how it was being spent on advertising, and there used to be a lot of gay publications, there were several lesbian publications, there were several gay and lesbian publications, you know, and all of them had stuff that appealed to lesbians, to gay men. We had the bars, we had the bookstores, you know, things like that, and promotion of books and films, huge, you know, films. And everything all of a sudden started getting pushed towards this idea that for all gays and lesbians, we had been remiss, we had been bigots, we had not paid attention to this poor community of transsexuals. I thought I was a transsexual for most of my life. So don't, you know, they couldn't get me on that too much. I mean, I backed out of that. That's another story. But that's where this tea came in, was like, we've been ignoring transsexuals. Aren't those extremely rare people in the world that really go all the way? Again, with medicalization, fakery, the whole 24/7, you know, let's change the secondary sex characteristics. That was like this size of a community. It wasn't even a community. But all of a sudden, money went towards driving the narrative, and lesbians leapt onto this because it was like all of a sudden, oh, we've been ignoring all of these poor people. The poor people were mostly men and AGPs who were saying they felt like women and they needed to be treated like women and they should be treated like women. And all of a sudden, I think that lesbians became the drivers of this. Here's this, they bought hook, line, and sinker the narrative that was saying, this is a new civil rights movement. You need to embrace it. You are actually the ones that need to take that ball and carry it. And lesbians had already done that with dying gay men around AIDS. Lesbians rescued many of those men. Many of their lovers had disappeared. Okay, who hangs around? Women. We attach, we stick it out, we help, we make sure. Well, there were a lot of women who stayed with gay men until they literally were dead. That went on all in San Francisco. It was a big, big, big thing. Immediately following that piece, where lesbians literally got divorces in their own relationships because they were spending so much time hanging out at the homes and the apartments and the whatever of gay men that were literally dying of this horrible disease. There were relationships that broke up that women don't even want to talk about. They don't want to admit the children that they left behind, that their lover ended up raising that child because they completely abandoned their family to be with their gay male friend who was dying, and they never seemed to manage to extricate themselves from that. That's a whole other story that I saw go on again in San Francisco. So how do you go from a community like that where women have already been used to taking care of gay men, and then you're barely getting back into, once that sort of dies down a little bit, you start getting back into your lesbian community and your lesbian relationships. Well, now by then we've got these women, at the Michigan festival, just pounding literally like at the door, let me in, and this keeps going on. And women saying, hey, he's doing well enough. I mean, look at all the trouble he went to. And then you've got money, every event, you've got authors coming, you've got locally in town here, you've got men who are calling themselves lesbians, and they're literally running what was the women's studies department at the university, and now they're running it and they change it over to gender studies. So the slow creep over years, and then this massive money comes in, and a big giant LGBT center, and this Trojan horses come in, and we're all just supposed to wrap our arms around it. And then nobody, I mean, in general, this is why I wrote the 4 Horsemen of the Gender Critical Apocalypse. People don't like to think critically. They really don't, because we see the hypocrisy in our own lives. When we do that, we're questioning most authority. You're questioning yourself. We're all hypocrites in certain ways. Like I said, whether it's private or public, to me is what's important. How do we support and center women always? And for me as a lesbian, looking at how are the voices of lesbians constantly being shut down, being attacked. As much as lesbians have embraced this thing, and I think been the drivers of this, and it is something about changing the narrative now, because it's very rare to see any lesbians going up against gender ideology here in the United States. Very rare to see a woman who says, I'm a Democrat and I do not believe in this. That's very rare too. It's to me, it's a natural thing. I'm not surprised by it. And now, because of all of this understanding of the money behind this, it's a guilting. It's a guilting of an entire sex, if you will, that women are supposed to be doing all this because we're the ones that really help and protect and save other people. So it's a very sad state of affairs, but I see it in the same way happening right now in this movement, where somebody, and I've said his name before, Graham Linehan is just embraced. He's just embraced, like we're so desperate that we need to have this man saying these things. And it's like, yeah, it's great. Say those. And as you said, educate men. For me, stay out of this conversation in a way where you use a woman like a prop sitting behind you, and a gay man who is one of the most misogynist that I have run across in this so-called movement, that is, to me, that epitomizes this. There's a desperation among women, us as just females. There's a desperation for men to come forward and do the right thing. And there are so few that know how to do that. And it just, we are always throwing ourselves, women throw each other under the bus all the time. And it's extremely difficult to look at that, to have the conversations about that, to use examples and say, well, this, you see this thing, that relates to this. And so I think it's a natural, I want to say, sadly, because of the way that we are socialized, and that, and Kelly J has said some stuff about this, her being a mother, is how much is about, but really nature, not just socialization. How much is by nature, just like our personalities are different. But there's something amongst women that in general, we are so desperate to be kind and to be seen as being kind. Even if we're not, we so much don't want anybody to think that we're unkind. And at this point in my life, you know how many fucks I give about that?
Well, I think it's the lifelong journey of a woman to throw off all the fucks, isn't it? And you get to a certain age, and I think you just decided, I think there's a great Mary Daly quote, which I really like, and it's something along the lines of, I decided I'd get as much shit for being a little bitty feminist as I would for being a massive one, so I decided to just go the whole way. And I think that it's one thing that we're all on a journey. I think I've always considered myself a feminist, but in the past 5 or 6 years fighting in this fight, I've really, really sort of internalized and processed a lot of the sort of conditioning and it's a process. And I hope that when I'm your age, I'm throwing off all the throwing away all the fucks. I know that you've got to catch your flight, so I'm going to let you get off. It would be great to catch up one time and go back. I'd love to hear all like the feminist history. You said you was a lesbian separatist. Love to get down and all that, and maybe get a bit more into like some of the stuff that went down. But for now, thank you so much for coming on the show. Can I ask you what's written on your t-shirt? It's been annoying me all the time. And yes, I like that. Yeah, cool. Make feminism scary again.
Yeah.
Where can people find you, Joey? Have you got any projects on the go?
I do. I have a SoundCloud. It started on SoundCloud. I have a podcast. It's Can I Get a Witness Voices? I only have 2 podcasts up right now. And just like the whole thing of the branding of Can I Get a Witness, it's all about uplifting voices that have been shut down, people that have been fired, people that have been squished. With the podcast, what I've done with the first 2 is I wanted to highlight the voices of parents who are going through hell. And this is happening, we know, all over the world, but it started out in the Western countries and now it's starting to hit the other places. But I've got 2 podcasts, one with moms and then one with dads is the second one. And the Can I Get a Witness Voices is also on Facebook. You're going to see a lot of protest images that show up on there. If you go on to Twitter and you want to see some of these actions that have been happening all year, you can put the hashtag in Can I Get a Witness? You can put the hashtag in Pull Back the Curtain. That is this campaign that I've been running all year, meaning pulling back the curtain, almost like I had Stella Perrette do an illustration. It's got the trans flag as a curtain that's over an old medicine cabinet, and there's a doctor's hand pulling that curtain back with a gigantic needle in the other hand. And inside the medicine cabinet is a bottle of Lupron, estrogen, things like that. It's all about exposing this enormous industry that's behind what most of us now, realize. This is gay. You talk about gay conversion therapy. That's what's happening with this thing. They call it affirmation. It's gay conversion therapy. And it's going on a mass scale. We know this is the largest medical scandal of our lifetimes, probably of this century. And we've lost a generation of kids already that have been sterilized. So anyway, that's a lot of, find me on Facebook like that. And and the podcast.
Okay, fantastic. I'll try and put some links in the description. So I know people could be a bit lazy. I do that all the time. I think I'll follow that up and then you just forget. So send me the links and I'll put them in there. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you, Joey. If you ever want to do it again, hook me up. Please like and subscribe the podcast. Like the video, helps us go up in the ratings. And yeah, stay tuned, make more noise. Ruins the View every Friday. This is DJ Lippy and Joey Brite signing out.
Okay, thank you.
And